Welcome back for another fun day of 115 of looking at how we can actually secure our MusicRater application. As you may recall from our previous video, when we were doing, or the lecture, I guess, the lecture videos also, the current MusicRater app suffers a problem. And you can actually see evidence of the problem in this one line right here, this one review right here of Old Town Road, which does in fact include Hannah Montana's, the real life Hannah Montana, Miley Cyrus's father, right, where we were able to actually add HTML and have it displayed, and making something bold, making something red, which I also have done, something like that, not a big deal. I can actually, I can start to make a lot of other changes, and among the changes I can make, I could actually arbitrarily execute any JavaScript that I want. Hi. Or howdy. I guess if we're talking about Hannah Montana, howdy is the appropriate thing. So we want to be able to secure it. And, one thing I'm going to point out is we got to think about how we're going to secure it. And one really, really popular approach, one thing that people love to do, is to do the security on the JavaScript side. And there are a lot of good reasons for this. It's a lot easier to secure it on the JavaScript side, and a lot of really bad reasons for doing this. In particular, so we haven't done anything with this yet, we will, but if you look, I'm just here in the, in the console, everything else, you can see that I have access to any sort of information that this program uses. I can look at the cookies, I can look at any cache storage, and I can actually modify them if I wanted. In addition, with the debugger, I can actually step through. So if I wanted to say, let's look at how we come up with these ratings, I can set a breakpoint by clicking on this line, reload my file, and what it's going to actually do is stop right here. And if you look, if I hover over something, it'll actually tell me what those values are. So I could start to make changes, and if I wanted, and I were malicious, I could step through it. I can sort of read and watch execute any code I want. It's actually kind of annoying. I'm going to stop it. So by the point we get to JavaScript, anything that's happened, anything that we want to happen as an end user, as me, as not the programmer, but someone who's malicious, they can make any changes they want. They can make any differences they want. So in order to be secure, we need to do this on this console, just so I can see it. We need to do this on the Python side. And now the trick is that, right, I already had the file split into two, the main.py, and that's where I'm going to do all of the web server work. So you can see here, hasn't changed at all. And ratings.py, where I do all of the interactions with the database and with getting in and getting, adding, updating all of the ratings information. So the question then becomes, how do I secure it? So the nice thing about having this whole split is, of course, if you look at all of the data, all of the web server code, so all of our serving up of pages, index.html, all the JavaScript pages, handling those GET requests, handling the POST requests, these really don't have to change either. There's just nothing here for them to change. So the only place we need to make any changes is in ratings.py. So this is actually the ratings.py I had from before. And we can just sort of walk through the changes that need to occur. And again, as always, just to beyond saying howdy to me, anybody who wants, if you have questions as I'm going, please type it into the chat. I do want to make sure I answer them. So beginning of our connection, work with the database, we have to connect. That hasn't changed. Have to get a cursor. Again, that hasn't changed. So now we have these calls to create table. But if we look at them, these calls to create table, they don't use any input from the user. The only thing we really have to protect against, we do have to protect against our own mistakes and our own stupidity, frankly, but that's not a security issue. That's debugging and everything else. So we don't necessarily need to worry about that. So here's where we need to start thinking about it is when we start to get data from the database, send data to the client, to the front end. So here we've got a select statement, but when we just have a general select statement, select star from table, we don't need to make any changes, right? There's, again, no input from the user. All of the attacks that we get are because the user is going to provide us what we think of as data, a rating, a review, the name of a song. But in fact, what they're going to provide us is code that attacks our system. Since they're not providing us any input here for all songs, we don't have to worry about it. But here we've got all songs by artist. And so now we have a select star from in the songs table. But we have a where clause, right? We say where artist is equivalent to, and then I've got a single quote, put in the artist name, and an end quote. So one interesting thing, one interesting story, if you're ever using a web application and they tell you you're not allowed to use a single quote as input, that right away should be a red flag for you that they're doing something wrong, right? The only reason why they would not allow you to use that, it's called as a programmer, we tend to refer to that as a tick. I don't know why, actually, it's a single quote, but that tick mark is because they're going to execute whatever you provide directly in the database, and they're trying to filter out any bad inputs. This actually happened to me at a previous job. I was helping the IT department. They wanted some faculty in to test out a new application. And so I was there and I'm like, oh, okay. And so I'm typing in something and typing in a report that we're going to use, that they wanted us to use, and, typing in some input. And I had a single quote there because I know computers and I know how to hack systems, and I figured it'd be worth it. And I hit submit and it gave me an error. And someone came over and said, oh, no, you can't use a single tick. That causes an error. And immediately I knew, oh, they're not separating out. They're not using the safe version of these SQL statements. They're not using what are called prepared statements. They're just executing it directly. And so I'm like, really? And the person's like, yeah. We don't think that people will do that too often. I'm like, you're really saying that this is an error? And at that point, the head of the IT, the CIO, who was in the back of the room, walks up and goes, Matt, hold on a second. I need you not to type anything in for a couple of minutes while we do something real quick. And I'm like, okay. And he goes into the back. He goes back to one of the computers in the back of the lab and starts typing away. And a minute or two later, he comes out and says, okay, Matt, good news. We're done. You don't need to stay here in this anymore. And don't worry about ever using this application. Whenever you want, just send us the report and we'll file it for you. And I'm like, well, but I want to use this application. I'd really enjoy it. And he goes, I understand that, but we've actually taken away your right to use this application. In the system, you'll get a protection error. And I actually added a note to your line in the users file to say that we're never going to ever give you rights to use any of our database applications again. And I'm like, but why? And I tried to look as innocent as I could. And he goes, Matt, what does your command say? And I go, it says, oh, true, and then another tick mark, semicolon, update, update, and I think of the name, update users where name equals Matthew Hertz, or update salary equals 1 million where name equals Matthew Hertz. And he goes, so what is that going to do? And I go, it's going to set my salary to $1 million. And he's like, yeah, that's why you're not allowed to ever use our systems again. So it would have worked too, at least for half a paycheck. They probably would have caught it pretty quickly when they, ran out of money. But so we never want to use this. And if you ever see something where you're not allowed to use a single quote in the input, that's a good sign. So instead, what we're going to do is use the safe version of this. And so the way that we do this with the safe version, rather than having the input directly, what we're going to do is we're going to use a question mark. And that question mark tells Python, and actually tells Python to tell the database, SQLite, look, there's going to be some data I'm going to provide here, but I'm going to split out that data from what you execute to make sure that we stay safe, right? And so now what will happen is, after that, I need to provide my result as a tuple. And now remember, when we do a one tuple, a singleton tuple, I need to have that trailing comma. But what this does, by splitting our code, that is the SQL statement, from the data, that is what I have here, it lets the database know which piece is which, and it means that we never actually execute what the user has typed in. Even if they type in something malicious, we're just going to see that as a result. We're not going to get attacked by it. As a side benefit, it's a lot easier to write these types of statements. So to be perfectly honest, the only time I ever write and use the unsafe versions of these select statements is when I'm doing it for the first 2 lectures of this class. Pretty much I never ever do this in my code. So we can continue to do this. You can see we've got another statement here. We don't want to do that again, so we'll use a question mark and then add our ID. And so having changed this version, this ratings for song, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to make this change because it's easier. But if we think about where this is called, see if I can find it. It won't let me find it that way. There we go. Ratings for song. So we call it here. Note the only other place we call it is from Get Songs, and Get Songs uses an ID that's already in the database. So having made this change right here, ratings for song, having made this change right here, I'm doing this honestly just out of habit. There is nothing wrong with using the original version of that query. Since that's not user input, it's not really that dangerous. So here we're adding data. So I want to use the safe version of this. And again, it's going to be a lot easier. So what I'm going to do is use the question marks, right? And there are 3 of them. And then I can still provide this. And I need my tuple, and I'm just going to make it a separate value. I'm going to make a variable for it. Honestly, and I'm doing that because I want to illustrate for you all how this works and point out that we can do it directly, like up here. We can also use a variable. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, since this is a artist, I can really spell. Just so we can see what it comes out. Note that with this 3 tuple, it's another value. A tuple is just, it's kind of like a list, but unlike a list, which is mutable, we can modify it in place. We can change its values. A tuple cannot be. So I can create it the same way that I can create anything else, and I'll just print it out just so we can see it. And now I'll do the same thing over here. Now I can be faster and copy it. So song ID, and again, I'm going to copy and paste because it's faster and I don't imagine watching me type is all that interesting. So we can execute that and see that this is safe. Again, for the song not added, we're going to do the same approach, right? We're going to take that where ID, and rather than having the ID buried in there, we'll use a question mark and then provide a outside. Just add our value as a separate thing. And note that, again, another little benefit of this is it's a lot easier to handle with strings, right? Strings we always have to put in quotes, either single quotes or double quotes when we're using SQL. Here we don't. Okay, there. Okay, there. And that's the end of our databases. So now if we reload this, restart this, get that output back. Reload my page. You can see our results are still just there. There's no problem. If we add a rating, just so we can see it, right? So what we're going to do whenever we insert a rating, we'll see that that insert works. We can have our review. Let's do Moana. Give it a 4. And you can see it comes up perfectly well. And if we look over here, you can see that the SQL is insert into ratings, values, and then the question marks. And then, of course, what are we adding? We're just adding that tuple. So we get the ID, the number, and the results. So again, pretty easy. This actually works out really well. It's a relatively straightforward changeover. But if you look, there's still a problem. If I can do my reviews, and now we're safe in terms of our database. The database has saved itself, but we still have the problem. Suppose someone's really emphatic. They really hate this song. That we're susceptible to this cross-site scripting, this being able to add any sort of HTML, any JavaScript code that we might want to this web page. So in order to solve this, what we need to do is, and I talk about this in the video, either we need to somehow filter out all of those bad ideas. And let me just state for the record, filtering never works. As soon as you try to create a filter, you've created a game between yourself and everybody out there, any hacker out there, and you're never going to win that game. I mean, if you think about it in real world terms, if you're in, the real world, well, what does that mean? In the real world, if I'm a hacker, what do I have to win? If I can hack through your system, right? If I'm trying to hack into a bank, I've got all of the money that bank has available. If I'm trying to hack into some application, I've got all of the passwords, whatever data it has, that is my value. As an employee of a company, if I'm trying to prevent a hacker, what do I have invested? I have my paycheck. And, that's important, and I'm not saying it's not a good thing. I do like my paycheck. But what I will say is you're never going to win that battle. The hackers always have more to win than you have to lose. So the better way of doing things, rather than trying to create a filter and limit things, is to use encoding, just to change things around so that they can't create any HTML in the first place, so that we split out our data from our code. So to do that, we need to add this HTML module to our Python. So you see I have import HTML. And we have to think about when we want to do this encoding, right? There are 2 times we can do this encoding. On the one hand, we can do this encoding when we send out data to our client. There are some benefits of doing it that way. In particular right now, where I already have some HTML in here, by sending it out when we send it to the client, we're going to avoid those issues. The flip side of this is, if I always just say I'm going to encode it whenever I send it out to a client, after I read it from the database, I'm counting on doing the right thing every time. The only way that works is if I never make a mistake. And I don't know about you. I certainly know about me. I make mistakes all the time. I don't want to bet on my never making a mistake. So the better way to go about this is to encode things whenever we add it to the database. If we make a mistake and encode it a second time when we're retrieving it from the database, we'll be able to see that and fix that very quickly. I'll show you that in a second. But if we ever forget, we still have a second time to keep it secure. So it's going to make it a lot easier. So the way that we can do this encoding is there's a function in the HTML library called HTML escape. And so we can call it this way. Thinking about it, that's kind of a silly way to do it. I'll probably do it this way, which is a little bit easier. So let's think about how we're going to do this in rating now. So we got to think about where are the possible ways that we can be attacked. So for the song ID, that's definitely a possibility for attack. I want to put that in there. For the review, that's text. In fact, that's where I did attack. That's also text. I want to add that. For rating, that is supposed to be a number. So that isn't actually a way that they can attack. I don't need to do anything. Now, if I add HTML escape, it's not necessarily a problem. Actually, I don't know if it will work because HTML escape's expecting a string. Let's try it out. But it's really not a way for somebody to attack. So now what will happen is, let's see if it just even works. My review. We'll do level of concern. Yeah, So it in fact doesn't work. And the reason why is we can't call HTML escape on an int. So we don't want to do that on an int, right? It doesn't make sense on an int. There's no way for them to attack, to add JavaScript to an int. Just to make sure everything's okay, if you wanted, what you could do is verify that it's an int, add this little bit of, add this int, call this int function. The only benefit of doing that is you have to remember when we have this insert rating, actually, we don't even need that. So when we have that insert rating, we want to make sure it's an int, but in our function here, right, to rate the song, we have to make sure it's a valid rate. And the only valid rates are the ints 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Since we know that that rating is going to be an int, it has to be an int. That's the only way we can execute this code. We do not need to add any sort of escape. We only need to do this HTML escape on things that could be attacks, on strings. So now if we load this in, load the page, it's not going to actually do anything. Note that because we're only doing this filtering on the inputs, everything that's already in there that's using bold is still there. But now if I add something like decent, it works out perfectly well. If we look at what got printed out, note that it's no different than before. When we don't provide any characters, any symbols that are an attack, nothing happens. That's pretty good. The other possibility is if I am trying to attack it, so again, I'm going to make this bold. What's going to happen is it outputs it exactly like I typed it in, right? So rather than interpreting this B, greater than, less than B, that bold element, as an HTML element, it actually just prints it out. And the reason why is that it has been encoded. So that HTML escape function built into Python in that HTML module automatically turned the less than character into ampersand LT, which is how in HTML we write a less than. Then we have the B and the ampersand GT. Basically, it's going to take it and turn whatever I wrote, it's going to make sure that that is exactly what HTML outputs. So this is what actually gets sent. We can actually see it in the network. In the last rate song call. If we look at the response, you can see what actually gets sent over is not what I typed specifically, but the HTML encoding of what I typed. And so this prevents attackers from being able to hack our app and use our app to hack, more accurately, everybody else. They can't add JavaScript to it. It would just get rendered in a way that doesn't hurt anybody. So the tricks to doing safe coding of a web app, there are two pieces of this. The first one is to always use that secure version, that safe version of the select where and the insert into, and that is the version that uses the question marks and tuples. The other thing to do is any input that we get from the user, or any input we get from, I shouldn't even say the user, any input we get from the front end, anything that comes into our system, that is a string. We need to make sure we do this encoding. We call HTML escape. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully this is relatively straightforward. Any questions about this? Okay, I don't see any questions coming in. So hopefully this made sense to all of you. I thank you all for your attention. If you do have any questions coming up, I will be having office hours at, I guess I have office hours at 4 o'clock today. It's a Friday. Yes. God. Hopefully, I don't know if you guys are like me where everything is, all the days and everything are starting to blend together. Only 2 more weeks left of the semester before we get to finals. Have a good weekend. Make sure you stay safe, stay healthy, try to have a little bit of fun. And I will see you all on Monday. Bye.